Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. My name is DiDi Delgado, and I am an organizer and community builder. And I am here with none other than the illustrious Ijeoma Oluo. And we have two American Sign Language interpreters with us today. We have Ashley and Cheryl with us. And so I'd like for y'all to welcome them. I'd like to explain to y'all a little bit about Ijeoma. In 2018, Ijeoma released her first text, So You Want to Talk About Race, to critical acclaim. The work examines how understanding the subversive nature of white supremacy is key to making lasting social progress. In 2020, amid record breaking uprisings and mass mobilization for racial justice, So You Want to Talk About Race became a centralized text steering conversations of racial liberation and transformative social change in America. Ijioma's latest work, Mediocre, which we're here to talk to y'all about today, delves further into exploring the intersections of white male privilege and how societal beliefs and expectations of superiority cultivate facades of grandeur and entitlement. Mediocre and So You Want to Talk About Race are available for purchase locally from Papercuts Bookshop, which we are live and in charge from in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts, which is also known as Boston, and from most major retailers. For more information on Ijeoma Oluo, please visit her website at www.ijiomaoluo.com. Ijeoma, welcome. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. Um, how are you like dealing with COVID? You and I spoke 8 months ago, and now we're here again, and I'm very happy to have you here. And I was just wondering, like, how has COVID shifted your perspective on our political climate and on your personal climate?
I think that when we look at things politically, what we see is what happens anytime we have crises, which is it exacerbates the social and political inequities that we have, to a really deadly degree. So I would say, I'm not identifying many new problems post COVID. It's just like amplifying how desperately we need to address so many issues, especially around racial inequity in this and housing security and things like that. Personally, it's been tough, and I think it's been tough for absolutely everyone. We've lost friends. My son got COVID less than a month into leaving for college. We're just trying to balance and, like everyone else, trying to stay safe. Seattle was one of the first cities hit in the United States. So, we've been on lockdown since the very beginning of March, and we're very, very tired. And just hanging in there and just hoping that we can, bring everyone through it. But, I think it's been a weird year. We had a house fire last year that I think underlined for me in a way I haven't felt probably since my youth of how important housing security is to your general safety, especially in a pandemic. And so it kind of underlined that for me, and then also underlined how deep our privilege is as a family right now. And so, it's just kind of filled me with this sense of dread and panic for so many members of our community um, who who don't have the ability to rebuild after a disaster, who can't find any sort of secure housing to keep them safe, who have so many other, who are having to make decisions between other necessities they need and their ability to stay safe from COVID. So, I think we're all struggling. And I think, I'm trying to hold space for that and personally what it's meant for our family. And then also, recognize how incredibly fortunate we are.
Thank you. My microphone isn't in its usual place, so I'm like, okay, I can't see myself. It's a mirror, which is a metaphor for a lot of things in my life, right? So thank you for answering my question. I wanted to draw a parallel if I could, but I want you to help me draw this parallel, right? I want to know, how does the release of Mediocre, and I love saying the subtitle. I almost sent it in an email today, but I was like, that would be adding the petty to the petty, right? But Mediocre, the dangerous legacy of white male America. How does this feel in comparison to the release of your first book, So You Want to Talk About Race? Are these two books in conversation with one another?
Yes and no. I think that um, I think that books can serve many purposes. I've always viewed So You Want to Talk About Race as kind of a workbook, right? It was the thing that I wanted people to kind of keep going back to further and pull these important conversations that so many of us have to have out of this place of, repetitive trauma and, into a place that's more productive. Like I envisioned it being this thing that's like, crap, I keep messing up intersectionality. Let me go back and try to, figure out how I can move past these arguments into something that really means something. Um, but mediocre is a diagnostic. And so I think, for me, Mediocre is in many ways a very, very different book. I think that if you couldn't read So You Want to Talk About Race, there's probably no way you can engage with Mediocre. But it's not a book that I feel like you're going to come out and be like, okay, I know what to do now about white dudes. It's a book because I feel like we're so far behind in recognizing and naming this problem that that's really what I wanted the book to do. I think writing style wise, there are some similarities and differences. I want everything I write to sound like me. And I think, there's the personal touches and things like that that I had in So You Want to Talk About Race, but even writing style, it really stretched me. I think that I think an interesting thing happened with So You Want to Talk About Race, which was I wrote it every day, kind of imagining Black women who would use it in their workplace. Of course, I knew white people would read the book, right? I know the way that media works. I know the way that my audience works. But like when I'm writing and you have a person you're writing to or for, but that's not how marketing in a white industry works. It's not how whiteness likes to claim things, and they really claimed it. Mediocre, I think, it was a bit harder to claim. I could have been more explicit because I definitely see the efforts around it, but it's definitely something where I feel like a lot more of the immediate response is, holy crap, this is my truth, like this is my life, and I didn't recognize that it was part of a bigger picture. I think like So You Want to Talk About Race is written for people who get that there's a problem and they want to know what to do. Mediocre is for people who know something's wrong and they're just not sure, they're not quite sure what, or they've been told that nothing really is wrong, but they know deeply that there is. And so I just think they serve different purposes in the conversation.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Because I appreciate you saying that, and I'm just gonna have a candid conversation with you. I don't want people to think that this is an interview because I have never sat down and interviewed anybody. Um, but I thought about your first book, and I got it because I was so proud of you, right? But I was like, it's not really marketed for me, and I'll probably use it if I'm doing a workshop. And I didn't know that you wrote it for us, and so now that I know that, I'm going to go back because this book I wanted to know about. I wanted to know about it. I didn't want to have a conversation about race as a black femme, right? And but this book I was like, no, I want to explain to the black men in my life, right? If I have the spoons, why it's such a problem, right? Why the things that they emulate is harmful to black femmes, right? And so I'm appreciative of that explanation because I didn't know, like, and now that I do know, I'm probably going to go back in time and read both. Like, um we have been having general discussions, and I mean, we've been having them 5 times a week, so I have to shout out my entire team, and like 80 to 170 people have been coming to these discussions, and because they want to know too. So I just want to let you know that this is a testament to your work about it sounding like you and being authentic, not only your personal voice, but we all know that the personal is political, as Audre Lorde said. So I just want to say thank you for that. And it gives me a framework to go back and read your first book because I wasn't sure if it was a conversation I really wanted to delve into because I was like, I know about it. But the way that you explain shit in this book, I was like, holy shit, Ijeoma is really a good writer. I was just telling my partner this today. I was like, I was reading chapter 5 because that's all I've gotten up to. And I was like, this is a good book. Like, I'm turning the pages. Like, and I can't remember the last time I did that with a book that wasn't fiction. So thank you very much for your writing style.
Thank you so much. I'm really proud of this book. I do feel like as a writer, I feel like there's a story there. When I'm thinking about the way I want to tell things, I'm visualizing history, right? And I want people to be able to visualize it. And I think if you just write something dry that's just figures and doesn't actually show the picture, people aren't going to be able to tie that to real life. Like, you can't tie a bunch of stats unless you're a statistician to your life. I wanted the story to be in there, and I am proud of how well that turned out.
I like the story about the movie Working 9 to 5, and how you were talking, like how you just made it so relevant to you, not only because of your identity, but the fact that the movie came out 11 days before you were born. And it's so funny because I thought I was the only one that's a weirdo and a geek like that. But so thank you for validating me in your own personal testaments. Thank you. But we'll get into that in a second. When you were writing this book, Mediocre, how did you did you know that you wanted to start with a historical root of male whiteness, or did you work backwards from a current point?
Um, I knew that I wanted to show this story. Like, I knew, when it came to me basically because I was looking at where we were in history right now and watching how many people were failing to see that it's part of a path that we've been on, right? And I'm sure too, Didi, how frustrating it is to see all of these stories that are like, where did this white man come from? Why is this white man so angry? And you're like, are you kidding me? Like, he's
Right.
not new, and
We've seen this before.
exactly. And I wanted people to understand, and I wanted them to understand on a grander scale. So I always knew that was going to be it, but I don't write linearly. So while the book is kind of presented linearly from about, 200 years of history, I didn't write it that way. So the Buffalo Bill chapter was actually, I think, the last chapter I wrote.
Yeah, that was
Uh,
a huge question in our book club. We were like, how did she even think of this? Like,
yeah.
so thank you.
Way too much research, honestly. Like, it was ridiculous. Like, I had two research assistants who were amazing, who helped me gather information. And basically what we did for months was I had questions. I just started with a
Mm,
bunch of questions about white male identity in America, and like 25, 30 questions. And we kind of divvied the questions up and searched through American history to find articles and references, and, had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of information. And then I would just every night read through all of it that we would find each day and say, this seems interesting, and kind of try to plot it out, and then be like, okay, now can we find 20 articles on this, or, and kind of went from there. So it was a huge, like, it was just because, I mean, when you're thinking about white male identity in America, like, there's endless books that you can find, endless references. And so I was like, well, I want to know what sport was like. I want to know what film was like. I want to know how people were voting. I want to know what income was considered prosperous at this time. Like, we were just shooting for everything. And then every night I would rifle through it and be like, oh, this is intriguing. So there were a whole other like books basically of stuff I researched that never made it in because as I narrowed it down, it didn't fit the book, or, we ran out of space, or I just, was like, oh, this would expand too much, and so it was wild because I usually, so you want to talk about race. I've been talking about how to talk about race
you're
for
like,
so
I didn't
long.
said it.
Yeah,
Right.
like that was like, I mean, you look up your facts and your figures and your stats and your information, but like I knew what I was going to write about, right? There was no question, but this was the opposite where it's like I have no clue. And it was fun, and it was a ton of work, but it was actually the cool thing for me about it was so many of the stories fascinated me. Like, there were so many things that I was reading through and I was like, wait, what? Like, I think you've gotten through the chapter on the male feminist, right? Have you read
Yes.
that? Yeah.
Centering men,
Yeah.
white men, in social
Right.
justice. I was like, why you no speak about Tim Wise? Okay, all right.
So I was reading, those dudes came up in the beginning of the chapter because I was reading something completely different. And there was just one like small paragraph quoting them, and they sounded so douchey. I was like, these guys sound just like guys I know. I want to know more about them. So we just took some time and researched them, and this whole story came out. But it was literally just like I was fascinated, and I was like, and so stuff like that popped up all of the time, which made it, a little less traumatic of a writing experience than it would have been otherwise.
Thank you. Um, Something that just came from the audience was, and it's a question I struggle with because of the work we do in anti-racism. And the question is, how have white men changed, or do you feel like you've personally changed any white man's point of view? Because I don't know sometimes what I be doing this for. I feel like it's to uplift the voices of marginalized folks. And then I wonder, is it working? And, like, so.
Yeah. I think I write from a different perspective. So, one, I absolutely fundamentally believe that everyone has the capacity to grow and change if they want to. If I didn't, there'd be no reason to do this work. And I think that that's actually what keeps me pushing as hard as I push, because I'm not going to accept these like crap excuses that white men can't handle hearing the truth and can't learn a new way of living. I don't believe it. Like, they're human beings. And my life, our lives are testament to being able to live, and grow and change and face adversity and come out stronger for it. White men can do the same. But I never, ever, ever write thinking I have to convince a white dude of anything. Like, if we waited on that for the work, we'd be waiting forever.
But you're
So
basically like, these are just the rules. Them's the rules.
exactly.
Right.
Like, this is the system. And so I really wrote this book not thinking you're going to go, you're a white man and it's going to just blow your mind. I was thinking you're going to read this book and you're a white woman and you're going to see your son or your husband,
Right.
or you're a Black man and you're going to see how you've set goals that emulate white manhood and that they're harmful, right? Like, or you're going to say, hey, this is broken and I want to make sure that these dudes don't have the same power they have, that we stop rewarding them. And that's really why I write never thinking that. But I do hear from people, like, I think to be a white man who reads like Mediocre and comes out changed, you have to already be on a path to change,
Right. Right.
you know?
Right.
And I do hear from people like that. I do hear from, like, I have heard from actually a fair amount of white men who are like, you've named something that I felt in my life, this anchor, this feeling of like that I've been screwed over, that I haven't been able to name for a long time. And now I see
Mm.
some of the harm I've been doing because of it. But they were already on that path. Like, they weren't just, they weren't like running around being proud boys. Someone handed my book and they were like, oh my God, and
I see the
that's
light. I see the light.
right. Like, I'm interested in societal change, not individual redemption. That's your path if you should
Mm.
choose to take it.
Thank you for that. I'm thinking about when you were talking about your process of writing and that you had your research assistants helping you out in your studies. Was there ever a point that you got and you were like, hell no, I'm not fucking writing about this shit no more? Like, were there parts that made you, like, in even in the chapter I was talking to you about the just fire all the women, there was a point where you were like, even like male, I hate saying the word male, but I love it for this
Mhm.
intent and purpose, that male critics were saying the most cringiest of things about these critically acclaimed women actresses, like back in the day. I mean, not that it's changed because no
Mhm.
one knows that Dolly Parton is a humanitarian or anything like
Mhm.
that. But so was there ever a point in your research that you were like, I gotta stop this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so cranky when I'm writing. Like, anyone who's read a book will say, like, anyone who's happy writing a book, I don't even want to hang out with them. I don't want to know you if you enjoy the book writing process. You sound like a smug person that I don't want to be around, because it is hell. And especially, yeah, where it's like, I remember like yeah, even my research assistants would put in the notes and they'd be like, God damn it. Like, they'd write the notes
Right.
like, can you believe this? They'd highlight, be like, this asshole, and you're just sitting there like, oh my goodness. And there were times where it was really, I'm just sitting there bawling. What the
Right.
like I have some quotes in the chapter of around the Great Migration, of Black people who were putting out ads looking for work because they were trying to escape the South. And watching, reading Black people so desperate and describing the quality of their teeth, you know,
Right.
and I just, like, I was done for the day. Like, I copied down what I could, and I was like, I'm done. Like, I can't, like, the desperation, the pain, like, and the strength it must take to do that. And then, and especially, writing this with while the world is as it is, you know.
Mm,
Like it would ruin my day many a times, you know. And you know, luckily my partner is super supportive about it. And also like I would, you know, have him help me find things last minute. And so
right.
he started to see really quick, you know, like I'd hear him be like, oh god damn, you know, and he's reading something, you know. And there were plenty of times where it was like I would have to research, you know, murder and genocide, and I just feel like, nope, I'm done for the day. All I can do is take these notes, and I'm gonna have to go to sleep. And tomorrow we'll try this again. And sometimes it was hilarious. Sometimes things were
Right.
so absurd that you were
You're
just
like, what the hell?
are you kidding me? You know,
Right.
like when I was researching about like the True Story magazine, and they were talking about all the ways they're trying to discourage women from working by making all these stories about like women, and you know, it's dark. It's darkly funny. These stories of women going to find a job and ending up murdered because she dared go out in the world. And I'm reading these stories, and I'm like, this is the most absurd nonsense, like weird anti-women's work propaganda.
Right. Right.
Like,
Right.
you know,
You're like, they make posters about this shit.
exactly.
Like,
And like trying to thread this line, you know, this needle between encouraging women to work for the war effort, but not wanting them to work for their own like self-preservation or their own personal satisfaction. And so it was just like reading all of the manipulations. It was so blatant and hilarious, and yes, sad, but you know, sometimes if you can't find the absurdity in it, I think you would just drown, you know.
thank you. I speaking of your partner, I have to give a shout out to my partner because my partner has been helping me read for the intent and purpose of this discussion, and I'm very proud of him. And a question he asked that I was actually shocked by, and I was like, I'm not asking that. He's like, will you ask her? I was like, I'm not asking that. But I've been thinking about it and speaking with you just now, and I'm gonna ask,
Mhm.
do you think, I feel like a lot of times, when we talk about anti-blackness, people say that, black folks, when we're exercising anti-blackness towards each other, it's like a self-hatred. Do you think white folks, since they're such an individual people, they don't understand how to be part of a collective unless it's something forced upon them, like nationalism, right? Do you think that they know how to engage in hatred of how their history has played out of themselves?
I think that they spend a lot of time running from that.
Thank you. That's what I said. But I was like, I'm gonna ask her because she's the
Yeah.
expert.
Yeah, no, no, no. I think that there's a huge fear around that. I mean, there's a really good book around white identity. It's really wonky, but like I found it incredibly useful. It's called White Identity Politics. It's by Ashley Jardina. She's a sociologist, and she basically talks about the formation of white cultural identity and political identity. And what I found to be the central tenet that I found most important is that white identity is a dormant identity that's unnamed and
Mm,
unclaimed unless it's threatened.
right,
And I think part of that, it has to be because white supremacy is such a brutal, ugly, disgusting system. And so is, you know, hypercapitalism, which it is linked intrinsically to.
right,
That if you were calling it and naming it and showing what it was day in and day out, no one would want to be a part of it.
right.
And so, but it also means you can't improve it, right? If you're never talking about it, if you're never talking about what it
Reform
actually
white
is,
supremacy now.
like you can't, well, you know, but like you can't come up with a collective identity that's
Right,
better
right,
if you can't name what your collective identity is. If you say it doesn't exist, I'm just an individual, and it's just this reflective thing that pops up when you feel threatened, you're never going to sit and go, wait a minute, do me, my friends, my church members, my community members, do we actually want this for ourselves,
right.
or do we want to be better people? You can't have that conversation if you can't figure out who you are. And I think that white identity is terrified of recognizing their collective power and recognizing what they contribute to and the harm that it does, not only to people of color, but to themselves as well.
Thank you. Um, my best friend texted me and said, looking at chapter 2, is it possible to spot the contradictions of feminist white men? Because I think you talk about that as well. You were talking about how, like, white men, and I feel like, I know a ton of men who do this. We call them activists, right? They adhere to feminist values. They pretend for their personal gain or to get in the pants or the skirt of whomever, and then they denounce feminism, which is actually harmful to feminism because so many people want to believe that men can change. in mass, right? And so, do you feel that we like, are there any ways that we can spot the contradictions early on so that way we're not bamboozled by these wannabe feminists?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, I would
Oh,
say,
tell us, sis. Okay, all right.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that first and foremost, if someone comes to you and they're trying to tell you their journey and their journey doesn't come with actual accountability that the people they've harmed can feel, then they haven't taken that journey. Right. So a lot of times white dudes will come into the midst and act like they were born perfect feminists, and you know that's not true. So then you're like, okay, where's your journey? What got you into this room? And if it
Right.
doesn't have any real accountability, then they're
I
not even.
believe women should receive equal pay, and then
Yeah,
that's it.
I believe pants should have pockets. You're like, oh, thanks. And so it's just, it's not the real work. Also, I would say what's always fascinating to me, the thing I always think of is, would we allow a person of color in our midst? Would we allow a woman in our feminist groups to get away with this crap? And chances are it's not. We wouldn't, right? Like there's
Right.
comments dudes get to say in our spaces. And if a woman said it, we'd be like, that's screwed up. Like, why would you say
Right.
that?
Right.
And so if we believe that, like, we should have more grace for the women than we should
Right.
for dudes who are in the space. And I think that we're conditioned to settle. And I think it's important to know our conditioning as well and to recognize how many different ways we've heard throughout history, right? That like men's nature can't be changed,
Right.
right? That all men are going to try to manipulate and that they're fighting that nature. And so it's virtuous for them to get halfway there because they're fighting that nature. It's not their nature. And if I'm the mother of two boys. I can
Right.
tell straight out it's not their nature. It's
Right.
absolutely imposed. And so if we can fight it and we can do better, then they can too. So I would say, recognize how easily like you'll feel a pang that something's wrong, and then you'll also immediately feel this urge to try to excuse it. You shouldn't feel relieved when things aren't worse than they are. It should be a
Right.
normal expectation for people to be respectful in a space, to know where they stand in a space, to respect what you're standing for and to center the people who are most impacted in a group. And if you can't apply that fully to men in the space, then you need to be able to have people check you or have resources that you can go
Right.
to check that behavior. So part of it too is just we have to be really clear and state what is and isn't appropriate. And talk about what warning signs of predatory behavior look like.
Ooh,
Hold
child.
space for healing, because chances are, and I mean, I don't even know if this is going to be controversial to say,
Say it.
but chances
My
are,
lashes are here for you to say it.
chances are, if there is someone predatory in your movement and you missed it, there's also someone predatory in your personal life and you've missed it as well.
Mm,
The ways in which that we have taught to be in relationships with men and to allow predatory behavior is a reflection of the predatory behavior that we've been told to not only allow, but even to be grateful for in our romantic lives, in our professional lives, in our friendships.
do you
And
feel like that goes back to patriarchy, like the old
absolutely.
trope that men should lead, right? And so it's like when a male leader comes in, we're just like, thank goodness.
Yeah, and that we are supposed to nurture them in their redemption journey, right? And their growth and through their pain, that there's always a reason why a man will act aggressively, and it's always a good reason. And all he has to do is show that he's there. Like and chances are you will see that in your relationships as well. And
Right.
if we can't have conversations about that and create space for healing from that really abusive pattern in our feminist movements, we're never going to be able to eradicate it from our movements. Like if we can't hold space for the ways in which so many women and femmes are harmed by this idea,
Right.
um, and the different areas we are in healing, and that we're not going to, instead of acting like, because there's something that happens in a lot of these spaces where we act as if because you're a feminist and you're in this space that you don't carry that bullshit with you, that you aren't prone to be susceptible to an abusive relationship, that
Right.
you aren't going to center men when they don't need to be centered. But instead, I think we need to open up to the fact that just because we recognize something's deeply wrong doesn't mean that we've eradicated it from our lives, and
Right.
hold space for healing from that, and set up accountability where we can say, hey, did you realize what just happened in this space? Like, I think we need to realize that and be open to the fact that maybe we're not recognizing it. Maybe we haven't moved past this, and allow that healing, because chances are it's living in many areas of our lives and harming us in many, many ways. And part of what the harm that we do in feminist spaces, and I'd say we do this in anti-racist spaces as well, is we don't allow kindness and healing for the ways in which women have internalized that, and allow us to talk about it in a way that allows us to to
The pick
inform
me
each other.
conversation kind of shuts that down. And I'm
Yeah.
a pick me because I've been picked and I don't even know how to act right now. So it's like, okay, like
But I think we need to look at that, like what that healing looks like as well. If we don't hold space for healing, we're always going to be susceptible to those same manipulations in our groups.
Um, the other day, I reposted something I wrote in 2017. I've been regurgitating all shit I wrote in 2017 because everyone hated me because I said Black Lives Matter. And then all of a sudden, the state sanctioned murder of George Floyd happened, and people were like, that damn DiDi Delgado was right this whole time. Oh my goodness. And so something I wrote, I said, every time a trans person gets caught in public going off on someone for misgendering them, it's a meltdown. But I've seen no less than 50 fights start because one guy called another guy a bitch or a pussy in a bar. Nobody is more fragile about being associated with the wrong gender than cisgendered men. And you can't change my mind. I was actually surprised that the majority of people, it went viral, the majority of people who saw this agreed, but there were still those people that were like, what am I reading? I mean, the comment section was gross. What am I reading? You can't challenge a man's manhood. And I was like, well, you can't challenge a person's personhood. And a friend of mine made a point that, in fact, challenging manhood, because it's a fallacy in the first place, it's a construct, it is less important than challenging someone's personhood. Like, how do you navigate conversations where trans folks are not being protected because it's like not that serious, or it's a choice to be trans?
Yeah, and that was actually something that was really interesting for me in the book, because I'm writing about white men, but what is stated at least a few times, but honestly, I would have to restate it every time for it to be as clear as it should be.
Right.
I'm writing about white cis men,
Right.
right? And so even within my book, there is an upholding of a non-existing binary, right? That I think is important to address. I think that what's interesting to me is we're talking, when I'm writing about manhood, I'm writing about the social construct. And I think one thing that becomes really clear is how harmful it can be as is design, but also how manipulated it is regularly. And so you have, I think, who someone is as far as whether they are a man or a woman or non-binary. And then you have how they choose to live in it, which is something that I think we could all be served to take ownership of. And I think no one does a worse job of taking ownership of how they live in manhood than cis men, especially cis white men, right? And saying, because this idea of, no, I can't help what behaviors this brings. You absolutely can. And this is yours. If your manhood is yours, then why would you be threatened by it? Why wouldn't you take ownership of it? Why wouldn't you decide to make it something better? And I think that, women have to constantly push back against externally defined ideas of womanhood. Trans people of all genders are having to push back against externally defined ideas of gender. And white men need to do some of that work and recognize that, like, if you think that you don't get to pick what it is, that even the idea of letting something soft into your idea of manhood would destroy it, then you don't actually own your manhood. Like, that's the real problem. You don't own it at all. It's
That the
something
whole
that,
sticks and stones can break my bones, but it's like, them words are hurting me. Like,
right,
I don't
right.
know why that is.
Yeah, I don't either. And I mean, I think, like, as a parent of two cis boys, one is 19, one is 13. um, it's amazing to watch how much you have to fight to allow to protect their own personal definition of manhood, because the world wants to steal it from them right away. And it's so funny to me because it's the opposite of the way like white men think of themselves as wholly independent. If you're so independent, then the color pink wouldn't dissolve you like into nothing, right? Like you would still exist. You would still exist. Trans people exist. You would still exist if you had to cry. You like you wouldn't disappear. And it's such a weird, it's the opposite of the strength they think they're projecting, because instead it's this idea that like it's so fragile because you haven't owned it, because you haven't said this is actually what I decided my manhood is, and that it is strong enough and lives within me. And I think, every other identity that's not a white cis male has had to do that because we've had to push so hard against these externally enforced identities. But white men don't realize that their identity is an externally enforced one as well.
I want to continue talking about externally enforced identities. In chapter 2, when you discuss the Bernie Bros, I was like, I go to this school. I can't tell you how many friendships like were challenged and then ultimately decimated by the surge of Bernie Bros. Even I won't say the name because I don't even want to give them credit. Even a very popular political group here in Massachusetts that was tasked with getting more people out to vote really, really, really thought that Bernie Sanders was going to win, and they literally ostracized so many people in that fight. And so I think about in chapter 2 how you tackled the Bernie Bros, right? I feel like you tackled them. I feel like I wish you were a lacrosse player. I really do. Like I wish that was your thing. You had received a whole bunch of hate for posting a tweet that referenced Bernie in a dream that you had. When writing the book, did you have concerns about an increase in hateful messages, especially from white cis men? And do you have a self care practice that helps you resist or repel that kind of energy? And if you don't have a self care practice other than eating ice cream and buying pants from Universal Standard, I can understand that as well, sis.
Yeah, I think that's actually part of why I wrote it. Was because people kept when people heard of writing this book, they're like, "You're going to talk about Bernie Bros, right?" And every time I was like, I don't know, because I was like, I don't want to bring that mess back into my life. Like, if you've ever had to deal with that mob, you're like, that's just no, I don't have the energy or the time, like, because it's so bizarre, so weird, like, and so obsessive. And, I didn't want to do that again. It wasn't fun. And then I realized, like, wait a minute, that's like exactly their goal, was to make sure that that the cost is so high for, you know, even the most basic critique that you wouldn't do it. And that's why I actually decided to write the chapter, was because I realized, I usually don't hold back on anything, but I was like, let me save some of my peace and not do this. And I was like, no, let me just do it. And so I did. And, it's actually funny because, yeah, there've been a couple of comments, and it's really funny because I think that chapter is very well laid out. Like, that is a really good chapter in the book, and the points are really strong. And I don't think they're points that can be easily refuted, even if you love Bernie Sanders. And so the backlash, I think because he didn't end up being the candidate, it's kind of quieter around him right now. B,
I didn't
you
mean to
know,
laugh, but I meant
you
it.
but the backlash didn't show up. And then, you could always tell, like, when a white dude's like, "Oh, I loved everything about this book, but that Bernie chapter," the
It's
response,
like you poured salt on their wounds and I stayed around for the steak. Like no, I really do. Like remember, we read this like
yeah,
5 times because we had 5 book discussions about it. And so
yeah,
I was just like just the responses and without, without let it be said that he wasn't the candidate. But then you discussed Joe Biden as well, right? And I'm like, hit him on the head. Like I felt like one of those soccer mom parents. I was like, hit him on the head, because I really feel like with the introduction of Joe Biden as president, people feel like racism will be solved, that immigration issues will be solved, that housing will be solved, that somehow a stimulus package will come out. And I'm like, this dude is still racist. Like
mhm,
nothing has changed. He's still sexist. Nothing has changed. And so how do we hold these men accountable?
I think part of it is we keep talking about it, like that we
Yes.
keep the history out there. We educate people. We look for signs. Like we said, this is just like this time, and this isn't what's unacceptable. And I think part of it is we have to learn from what people have done so that we can define what is not acceptable, right? If we recognize the room within which white supremacy will operate, they will take as much room as we give it as a society, right? And so even looking at the history of Biden, looking around busing, look at how much room and breath he was given because he was a quote unquote progressive, to completely undermine and betray the will of his constituents of color, his Black constituents. Um, we have to say, no, this is what it is, call it what it is, and say this is unacceptable. We know what this looks like, we know how this ends, but we can only do that if we keep talking about it. And I think that we have to recognize that, I mean, I believe in accountability, but I also believe, like, I don't care. I don't want the Joe Biden apology tour. What I want is, for people to be aware of what he can and will do when the chips are down, when he feels like it might cost him some white votes, so that we can say, absolutely not,
Well,
unacceptable,
if another corn pop story comes out, I'm calling
right?
it. You heard it here. If I hear one more, it's too much. It's too much. Something else I'm thinking about along those veins is, in the book you had said we have to be. You said, "quote We have to be honest about what white male supremacy has cost not only women, non-binary people, and people of color, but also white men." So, is there a way to promote this to white men by showing them the benefits or what they've lost, especially in the face of the power that they still hold and maintain? And, I think about activist Laura Lamoon always says that allies should be gaining nothing from giving us back the space that they've taken up. So, what do you think are the benefits? Because I hear you say this, and I'm like, I straddle the fence on the not all men are trash movement because I understand that young men, they're not there yet. Like, you know what I'm saying? But it's like, if no one catches them, if no one is having these conversations, and if we ourselves are still indoctrinated in patriarchy, misogyny, and misogynoir, like, how are we able to show our men or men that are in our lives? Because I think a lot of feminists, okay, now I'm about to be controversial. I think a lot of feminists fail to see like how they separate themselves from men that are in their lives and still have to deal with them. There's not an honest conversation about the complexity or the duality that there are men in our lives, even though we are staunch feminists. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of things, and I think, like you, I am ambivalent about it, in the sense that I don't want our movements to be defined by what it can do for oppressors, right? I think it's a given, that oppressive systems will oppress a hell of a lot of people, right? And our system harms white men a ton. And I think that that's really obvious when you look at how the average white man is doing, and, like, you look at suicide rates, and you look at, all of these different ways in which, they're tearing themselves apart, and the system is tearing them apart. But that being said, where we define, our anti-racist, anti-sexist movements by their liberation, means it stops with their liberation. And we can't, do that. But I will say that if you love white men, if you have white men in your life that you love, you should absolutely want better for them than this. Like, and especially if you are responsible for raising white men, if you are co-signing the work of white men, if you are building your future with white men, um, then you need to be asking for more. And you need to recognize, not only are you co-signing into your own continued oppression, but you're also co-signing, their destruction as well. And so I think a lot of times it's really interesting, because I will hear people who, are raising white sons and say,
that was one of the questions that came up, is like, how do you as a mom reconcile with raising boys and catching them, like we were
yeah,
just talking about? How do you do that?
I want them to be caught as early as possible when they're messing up. And it's a regular thing. Like my poor kids, they know they can't, like I am constantly, like I'm the mom who pauses TV and be like, do you know what just happened right here? Do you understand what this is? Because I want them to know. And I want, if my kids decide to abuse someone, I want them held accountable the very first time that happens. I want them to learn because I want them to be better. I want them to have authentic, healthy relationships with people. Like, not only do I want the world to be better, and I want them, and I don't want my children to be doing harm. I want I want them to live a healthy life. And you can't live a healthy life when your sense of self-worth is defined by the exploitation and oppression of others. That's a horrible way to live. And I don't want that for anyone I love,
That's right.
like at all. I know they can be better. And because I do, I am constantly pushing and watching, and I am aware. Like I am, like if you were raising boys or children that you think will be boys, it is vital that you look at what's being said outside of your home and know that just your conversations at the dinner table are not enough. You have to know the way the world is coming to try to shape them in ways that will not only make them harm other people, but will take them away from their core selves and do them real harm on a deep level.
Thank you so much for that. And can you hear me? I just want to verify. Some people have said that it was hard to hear me. I was like, this whole time we've been having intimate conversations, and sucks to be y'all. No, but we went ahead and turned up my mic, so thank you. What I want to shift gears for a second because I'd personally like to know what guidance do you have for Black and Brown parents, but more so Black parents, to support their children preserving their self esteem and confidence in a white supremacy lauded country.
A couple of things that I would say that work for me. One, you have to have a very pro Black house. Like, not just a neutral Black house, you have to have a pro Black house. Like, Black art, Black books, celebrate Black achievements, drag your kids to every Black thing that you can, like, take them and let them know, like, we are prioritizing that, because you're not only normalizing Blackness, you have to balance all of the hateful stuff that's out there in the world. You really do have to fill them with an overabundance of love and pride. And that also means love how they look, love how they move through the world. Tell them that their skin is beautiful, that their hair is beautiful. Point to other people who look like them. Fill their world with people, with Black people, and Black beauty and joy, and push those connections, especially right now in the pandemic when we are feeling more isolated than ever. I think that's so vital. The other tip I give that's really helped in my house is I have learned to bring some of my pain from everyday racism into the house, because acting like it doesn't exist. And I think a lot of times for parents, we feel like we have to be super strong. Our kids need to think
Right.
that we are always solid and always okay. It makes your kids feel like they're broken when something racist happens to them and it hurts them.
And because they don't know how to explain it, they don't have a basis point because you've never spoken about it in the home. That makes sense. Thank
Yeah,
you.
exactly. So I started doing things a while back where we'd sit at dinner and I just say, you know what, this thing happened and it really hurt me today. And I'm not going to cry, like a huge fit about it. It'll be an appropriate response to what happened. But letting them know I can bring that in there and talk about how it hurt and why then means that when my son comes home and something happens at school, he can say, Mom, this thing happened. And knows that I'm not going to immediately run off to the principal. I'm not going to, or I'm not going to tell him it's not a big deal or tell him he's overreacting, because I have made space that says, like, this is a place where it's safe to talk about this. And there'll be an appropriate response, an affirming response to it. And it also teaches him how to be supportive as well, because I can let him know, I can tell him what I'm expecting, what I want him, how he can be here for me. Then he knows how to be there for his friends and his peers, how to help build community that talks about these things. And I would say, especially for Black men, there's this idea that you don't bring your emotions around these things, that you don't expect support.
Right.
And so, it's been vital for me in the house to really build, like, this is a place where, we are filled with Black love. This is a place where you are safe in this home, and that you are also safe enough to talk about what's happening to you. And you're going to get the appropriate, loving, comforting, and helpful response that you need.
Thank you for that. I also want to take this moment, just because I feel like it's right on brand with what you're saying, to apologize to you for something. A while ago in your first book, you had talked about, and you talk about this openly as well, so that's why I don't mind sharing it. You talk about a situation where you were at a picnic with friends, and there were some, I don't know, were they black youth or
Mhm.
were they okay, and that had came, and you were like, one of these things is not like the other. I'm here with my bougie ass friends, and this doesn't go together. Like, you know what I'm saying? And I was like, I was super judgy McJudgington. I was like, come on, Ijeoma, you can't let yourself, especially growing up how you and I grew up, you can't let yourself get that far removed. But the reason why I'm bringing this up to you and I want to apologize is because I'm at a place in my life where knowing who I am and having all these trolls, I don't want my child to go to public school, especially, being moving back to my hometown city. I don't want them to go to public school. So now I'm trying to figure out how the hell can I afford private school? And I find myself thinking those same thoughts now. You know what I'm saying? And so my question, well, so I apologize first because it was wrong. Like I would never know that, I feel like the black family does a lot of this thing where it's like we're trying to get the leg up so much so that we don't realize that once we finally reach, I'm still cash poor, but I know people that have resources and I can lean on them. But once we reach that, it doesn't mean that I'm just as good to be at the table as a white person. It means that I still need to do more. I need to do more because that's a privilege I have now as someone who has this sort of educational privilege. And we're going to get into that in a second, right? Because I know you struggle with that too. But someone who has this educational privilege, or now I have the resource privilege, I have these white people with money who are willing to help me get my child into this prestigious private school, and I just get scared. And I think that maybe that's where you were coming from. And then people love to judge because that's what community is. Oh, how do you think that you're better? You made it out before me. And so I would just like for black folks, just because I just went through it, and you and I had that conversation like a year ago when you came to Albany, is I would like for black folks to realize that just because we're able to get a stronger position at our job, or just because we come into some money, that it doesn't mean that we have to shy away from our backgrounds. I don't ever want to be ashamed of being black, and I don't ever want my child to ask me, you know but I'm light skinned. You know what I'm saying? Like the things that my child will say because I have them around more white people, and we're not sharing these stories. So I just wanted to uplift that and say
Thank you.
again that I apologize.
Oh, thank you for that. That means a lot, Didi.
I have two more questions for you. Um, I'm like going through my list of thousands of questions now that people are leaving in the audience, and I'm trying to select good ones. All right, we spoke about that. We spoke about that. I guess this two in one questions. Do you think that there is any hope for white men to get out of their own way? And also, you had said white men who think that they are broken often take that anger out on themselves. So, how much of a factor you think that this problems with white male co-conspirators? And I'm setting that question up for a reason. Do you think that this shows up in forms of self-flagellation and performative activism we see from white allies?
I think some of the times, but I think that is actually more of like a self fascination, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I think that that is more like I think there's this idea, and I think we can recognize this even in film and books, where the anti-racist journey or the anti-sexist journey is centers upon the person with the most power and their personal growth, right? And so they perform this growth in a way that still centers them and makes them seem like a hero. Like, oh wow, can you believe it? He actually said that he thinks dudes are trash. Wow, that's so deep, you know.
He's
And
so lit.
right, and to me, it's cowardice. You know what it actually reminds me of was when I interviewed Rachel Dolezal a few years ago,
I'll never forget that. I have it
and
saved as a tab on my phone.
you know what it reminds me of though is she kept talking about how much she hates whiteness, and that's not her, and it made me so angry because we can't divorce ourselves from the impact that whiteness has on us. Only white people can do that, right?
Right.
Only white people get to move with pure autonomy through the world and then say, oh, that's not me. And it was cowardice and laziness and white supremacy to me to do that, because you could have stayed in whiteness and fought. If you hate it that much, you could have stayed in it and fought to make it something better, instead of saying, I'm going to just take my benefits and check out and then center myself in the story. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that a lot of times white men, where we see this overly performative, like, it doesn't do me, I don't care. I don't wake up thinking today's going to be the day where a white man tells me that he hates white men. I don't care. I don't care. That doesn't make me safer in the world.
Right.
What makes me safer in the world is you saying, I am a white man and I'm going to engage with my privilege and I'm going to have conversations with other white men. I'm going to get out of your comment section,
I think that's a script that you
you
need to give
know?
to white men. If you could write an addendum to the book just so that they could know, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they don't have to know. I just want them to like listen to this broadcast and be like, oh shit, that's all I have to say. It's that simple.
Yeah, and so that's really where I think that comes from. I don't think that actually comes from a true place of like any self-hatred at all. I think that comes from being so in love with yourself that you think that everyone in your midst is going to be fascinated with your personal journey and your personal growth, and they're not. I think where we see the self-hatred, we see this in addiction, suicide rates, abuse rates, and self-abuse rates. And I think that that's what we're seeing in 70% of suicides in this country are white men. I think that's where we're seeing it.
In Ivy League and the Tax Eaters, you talk about how you struggle with like education and like knowing how much white men place importance on education. What is your struggle? Is it because as black folks we were kept so far removed from being educated ourselves and we had to find different ways of education, and also this white man's education is important? Like, what is it? And like, as someone who is college educated, I'm trying to get there. As someone who is college educated, like, what could you say that like mitigates the harm of education while uplifting the importance of education?
I mean, there's a couple of things. Like, my struggle is knowing that it is a harmful institution. I don't know any black people in academia who come out of it whole, ever. I've never
Mm.
met a single one. And
I have a tissue.
there was this time where every time I would go to a college or a university, a black woman would break down crying. Every time. Talking for like a year. I couldn't go to anyone without a black woman breaking down crying, what they're trying to do in the institution, how unsupported they are, what it's taking from them, or the parts of themselves they had to leave behind in order to do their work. And that shouldn't be the price that we have to pay in order to have some chance of shaping the zeitgeist, in order to have some chance at financial security, right? In order to have some chance at professional success or respect. And so that's the problem I have. The problem I have is that the closest we get to building a society that can be supportive of people of color is a place that still makes sure that entrenches violent white supremacy. And it makes me angry because we can't lose it, and it's so far from good enough, you know. And when I talk to black people in academia, the ones who've been able to hold on to their core selves are hurting every day and are hearing from their doctors like, you're going to have a heart attack if you don't leave. And then the other ones left a lot of who they are at the door, and that's just as painful, and if not more painful, and that's not okay. And then the alternative is that we live in a world where people never actually get to read our words and respect anything that comes from us, where our young people don't get to live in more diverse spaces. Often for people, college is the first chance that young people get to live with people of different races, different religions, different sexualities. And the price they have to pay, and the fact that that learning and that experience is often on the shoulders of vulnerable people of color, makes me really, really angry. I hate feeling like our choices are so limited, and they are. And I don't want to defend higher education. We can't lose what we have, but it has to be made better. And so, it's a really tough bind to be in, where almost every critique of higher education is valid and real, but it will be weaponized by people who want to take away the little that it does give us.
You said a fucking word, and I say that with all the gusto, like, because that's what I'm struggling with right now. Like, I want to give my 100% best to my community, but I know I have to, in order to make an A minus at least, also pretend I give a crap about this institution's questions. and whether or not I'm in alignment with them. So thank you so much, because it is heartbreaking, and I wish more academics could have that conversation, because I think that they think about the financial cost, but I don't think that they think about the emotional cost. And so I appreciate your hearing your vantage point. I That's really meaningful to me. Also promised my partner that I would ask you, just because I have testicles. If it's possible that one day you could write my foreword, for you have inspired me to write a book as well, and so you could write my foreword, or if you want to contribute to my anthology, because I want to use my platform to uplift as many Black femme voices as possible and non-man voices as possible. I just like to just drop something all summer 2021. And so I'm asking that, you don't have to answer now, but I'm just putting it out there. Good juju requires manifestation. And so if I don't say nothing, I'm not manifesting it. Um, the question that I came up with, Aaron, and shout out to Reparations Cleveland, Ohio. Thank you. They're such an amazing group. Is there anything you'd like to say specifically to white women who are reading this book about interrogating their own complicity in oppression?
Yeah, I would say,
Yeah,
yeah, no, I mean, this is
I
literally,
go to this school.
yeah,
Okay.
I'm going to be writing this. I'm going to be writing the foreword to the paperback. And if there is one thing that I feel like, what's interesting is so many conversations we had around writing the book was how much to include white women in the book. And where I included them were places I pushed for it. And I didn't push hard enough. I did not. Because, and I'm seeing that in the response, because I am seeing how many white women are saying, oh my God, this book totally represents me. Oh my God, it's helping me. And I'm not hearing the response of, holy cow, like this is me. I do this. You know, I support this. I've done this harm. I've contributed to this harm. I need to be more explicit.
And I
Um,
asked I asked that question in the book group, and I think that
yeah,
the white women decided that they were no longer coming to my book group.
yeah, yeah. And I think like, what's interesting to me is I feel like, I think that many Black women read the book and immediately could see white women in it, right? Could see where white women contribute. And so like when I'm writing, I'm seeing that and not remembering like how easily like white women will manipulate even the text they're reading to not see that. And so it's something that I needed to be more explicit on. One thing that I will say that was clear to me in writing this book is that white women need to understand that their liberation is tied with ridding the world of anti-Blackness, that they cannot have liberation without it, because the patriarchy that oppresses them requires both racism and sexism to thrive, and especially anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity. And if they don't fight that, they will never be free. And they're going to have to recognize that, because they think they can still compartmentalize it. And even ones who've realized that have decided they're going to settle for something less than free. They will never be free if they don't recognize that, where they allow anti-Blackness to thrive, they're allowing their own oppression to thrive as well.
You have been so amazing. I just can't thank you enough. I feel like so full after having this conversation with you. And I didn't even eat my yogurt yet. So like this is real shit or whatever. So I just want to say thank you so much, Ijeoma. If y'all have not yet, get the book. Papercuts is they have it in stock. I think she has over 180 copies. Buy from local booksellers. Hello. Shout out to More Than Words Bookstore, which is a youth ran organization who I really wanted to do this event with, but we just couldn't get our stuff together in time. Shout out to Frugal Bookstore in Boston, a Black owned bookstore. Shout out to all the local bookstores that are doing this work and keeping books. I love it here. Um, Ichioma, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. Like I have so many bookmarks right now. It's not even funny. If you have not gotten this book, this is a good read. And I never say that. You have never heard me say that this is a good read, because I don't be reading these authors' books. I don't care. But this is a good, quick read. And then you'll feel so validated by reading this that you'll want to continue reading it. Like this is Mediocre on the Dangerous Legacy of White Male America. Cop the book. I also like to thank our American Sign Language interpreters. This is to provide a platform so that way more folks can understand what it is we're saying. And I wish I had the money to do this all the time. I'm looking into programs where we can automate it, but we definitely put a call to action out 3 weeks ago and asking for Black interpreters who are non-man. So thank you so much, Ijeoma, for pushing that envelope as well.
Thank you so much. And Didi, I love talking with you, and it's always been a
Look,
pleasure.
I feel so beautiful already. Go ahead, tell me
You
more.
look beautiful. Go ahead. Yeah, you should feel it. And this is just, this was a wonderful conversation. Thank you. I really do appreciate it. I really did enjoy it.
Thank you. So, with that said, this has been another installation of the Done for DD experience, and I really hope that everyone has a great evening. Thank you.